So before any nerfs come out, I'm just going to be honest, the best decks in the game are going to be Frost Death Knight, Evolved Shaman, and Unholy Death Knight. That's just how it is. They got really, really strong cards that make them very consistent and have a lot of early game pressure, but there are going to be a couple more decks on this list that can counter them or at least be about as powerful, so just stay tuned. First one is obviously Frost Death Knight. We already went over it. It's got a lot of board presence with a lot of early game minions. You can turn these small minions into big minions with the new location, and then you got decent burst damage at the end with a Marrow Manipulator, as well as the Frostworm's Fury, and then you can also discover something else with the Frost Strike if you need more damage. The next deck on the list is going to be Evolved Shaman because of this card right here, Blazing Transmutation. Gone are the days where Evolved Shaman low rolls and evolves your Goldshire Knoll into another Goldshire Knoll or something like a Sea Giant. Now, because of Blazing Transmutation and you're able to discover, like 99% of the time, you are going to get, at the very worst, an 8/8 with upside like Onyxia at least has Rush, but more often, you're going to get things like Sire Denathrius, you're going to get things like Deathwing, and you're going to get things like Thaddeus, which allows you to play more cards for cheap. The next deck on the list is going to be Unholy Death Knight, which is basically just a slightly worse version of Frost Death Knight. It revolves again around the location and a lot of small minions with decent abilities and bad stats like Foul Egg as well as Skeletal Sidekick. So you're able to get the good ability off, and then you're able to turn these small minions into big minions, and you're able to just snowball the board. It's got good damage with Grave Strength and sometimes discovered spells off of Nerubian Vizier, and then last but not least, you have good late game cards with Sylvanas and Lord Marrowgar. The only issue with this deck is it doesn't have direct damage, so if your board does happen to get wiped occasionally, it doesn't have the same finishing power as Frost Death Knight, which is why its win rate is like 2% less on Hearthstone Replay. The next deck on this list is my most recommended deck because of one big reason. It counters the best decks in the game. Frost Death Knight is favored into every single matchup in the game, except for Blood Death Knight, admittedly barely, but it's the only matchup that is even kind of considered bad for it. Next is Evolved Shaman. It has 3 bad matchups being Quest Priest, Ping Mage, and Blood Death Knight, but again, Blood Death Knight is the worst matchup. And then Unholy Death Knight has one worse matchup than Blood Death Knight, and that is Control/Quest Priest. I consider them to be basically the same deck. And then after that, Blood Death Knight counters it again. And the main reason is because the Frost Death Knight and the Unholy Death Knight are very board reliant right now because of the location, getting 4 or 5 big rush minions out. When you have cards like Asphyxiate, Corpse Explosion, even Blood Boil to some extent, you have the Gnome Muncher, and then in the late game, Soul Stealer, there's just nothing that your opponent, if they're building a board, can do, not to mention gaining max HP with the Vampiric Blood. And then Evolved Shaman, I don't care if you get a turn 3 Thaddeus, because guess what? I'm going to play a turn 3 Asphyxiate and kill your big minion anyway. So across the board, this deck just has a great matchup into the 3 best decks right now. And considering, at least in my experience, these 3 decks make up about 70 to 75% of the meta, I would highly recommend playing this deck. The next deck on the list is going to be Control Priest or Quest Priest. They're both very, very similar, and it's on here for the same reason as the Blood Death Knight. It is at least somewhat a decent matchup into some of these powerful decks like Frost Death Knight. It is the 2nd or 3rd lowest win rate matchup other than Evolved Shaman and Blood Death Knight here, and itself, obviously. Evolved Shaman, Control Priest, and Quest Priest are, again, some of the most favorable matchups, whereas most of the other ones are in the high 50s to low 60% win rates. This one is in the low 50s, and then Unholy Death Knight, it is the most favored matchup into this deck list. So, obviously, Control Priest isn't as hard of a counter as Blood Death Knight, but if you want to play this or Quest Priest because you just like Priest more as a class and you don't want to see any more Blood Death Knights on ladder, this is a very good alternative. The last deck on the list is a bit of a dark horse, and it is Pure Control Paladin. And the reason it's on the list is because from what I've seen on Hearthstone Replay, tweets from high-level players, and streams of high-level players, Pure Control Paladin is actually doing very well into the big 3 right now, the 3 best decks in the game, because you do have decent removal with the quality city tax to deal with big boards. In Evolved Shaman, if they get 1 big minion, Class Action Lawyer can at least make it a 1/1 and buy you some time. You have Cariel as well to increase your survivability late game. You got another good removal in Anachronos, which I forgot. Some extra survivability with Holy Mackerel, but the difference is this deck actually has more proactive plays. You're able to play minions. You're able to play minions with Rush and Divine Shield to really fight for the board and maybe get some board presence on there. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, the tier list is the big three and the counters to the big three. The big three are just so strong that even though I think decks like Imp Warlock, Pure Paladin, the more tempo-based version, and Big Spell Mage, even though I think that those other three decks are probably, in terms of power level, the next best decks in the game, they're just so far behind the big three that there's really no point in even playing them. Do I think that you can still win games with them? Absolutely. They still have about a 51% win rate overall, each of those three decks, but they're just not quite strong enough to compete with the best decks in the game, and they still kind of get countered by the control decks that are able to deal with Imp Block and Pure Paladin that build a board, and then Big Spell Mage, it requires you to high roll a little bit, and I just don't like the inconsistency that much, but it's up to you. I'll put those decks in the description as well, so there will be 9 in total down there, and that's about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the tier list, and hopefully nerfs come out soon, because they will probably come out on Tuesday or Thursday, I would assume. If not, oh boy.